look at how we solve linear equations. So the first thing we want to do is just have a look at these rules here to make sure that you understand these different rules. So rule number 1 says you can do anything you like to an equation as long as you do the same to both sides. What does that mean? Okay, well that might mean, for example, if I have the equation x equals y plus 3, if I want to multiply the left-hand side of this equation by 2, I also need to multiply the right-hand equation by 2. If I wanted to add something onto this side, I need to add the same amount to that side. So for example, if I wanted to add the value of 2 to that left-hand side, I also need to add the value of 2 to the right-hand side. And that would then become 2 plus x equals y. Now 3 plus 2 combined together would be y plus 5. So that's what rule number 1 is talking about, is you either multiply, divide, add, subtract, but whatever you do, you've got to do the same to both sides. Rule number 2, there should be only one equal sign per line. So that means if I see the equation like this, x equals 5 times 2 equals 10, I've got two equal signs on the same line. So we don't want to have our working like that. What we would rather see, x equals 5 times 2, and underneath that, x is equal to 10. Okay, so this is a much preferred way to do it because too many equal signs gets you into trouble. Rule number 3, collect all the variables on one side and numbers on the other. So when we're rearranging, we want all the x's or y's or a's or b's, we want all of those variables on the left and the numbers on the other side. When you want to get rid of something, perform the opposite operation. So now think for a moment, what is if I had x plus 2 equals 3? What's the opposite of adding 2? The opposite of adding 2 would be subtracting 2. So if I want to subtract 2 from that side, I also need to remember rule number 1, we've also then got to subtract it from the other side. So whatever you've got to do, you do the opposite. Adding and subtracting are opposite, multiplying and dividing are opposite. And lastly, rule number 5, your answer should always be in the form x equals a number. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of examples now. Okay. Let's have a look at example number 1. This has given us the equation here, x plus 12.3 equals 10. So what we want to do there, remember we're trying to get to the form x equals, we're trying to solve to find what x is. So something plus 12.3 is equal to 10. So what we want to do is we want to take this 12.3 and we want to move that to the other side of the equation. So if it's plus 12.3 on this side, when we move it across, it becomes minus 12.3. So we would write that as x equals 10 take away 12.3. Okay, which is then 10 take away 12.3 is going to give us negative 2.3. Another way that you could have done the working is we could have said x plus 12.3 equals 10. And what I now want to do is I want to subtract 12.3 from that side and subtract 12.3 from that side, which then these two will cancel to leave me with an x on the left and 10 take away 12.3, which is negative 2.3. So there was two alternative ways that you could show that working for this question. Okay, let's have a look at number 2. So number 2 says 6.3 minus x equals 14.9. Okay, so we want the x on the left hand side, we want to keep the x on the left. Now this minus belongs with the number that comes after it. This 6.3 number here, that is a positive number. There's no negative in front of it. So this is positive. This subtractional negative belongs with the x. Okay, so I'm going to leave the x where it is. So I'm going to leave that negative x there. I'm going to leave the 14.9 where it is too. And what I want to do now is I want to take that 6.3 and move it to the other side. So if it is positive on this side, when it's moved across the equal sign, it's going to become negative. So that will give me minus x equals, now 14.9, take away 6.3, simplifies to 8.6. And you can use your calculator for that bit. Now the last thing I need to do is I've got a negative x equals. And I don't want to know what negative x equals, I want to solve, so I want to know what x is. How am I going to do that? Well, remember, whatever I do to one side, I've got to do to the other. So if I multiply a negative times a negative, so negative 1 times a negative, negative times negative becomes positive. And the same if I multiply one side by negative 1, I've also got to multiply the other side by negative 1. So that's going to end up with x equals negative 8.6. Okay. Equally, I could have done, if I just do the same as I did above, equally, I could have said, look, I want to subtract 6.3 from that side, subtract 6.3 from there, and then those would cancel out to leave with minus x equals 14.9, take away 6.3, which is our 8.6. I still need to get rid of that negative x in front there, so I multiply by negative 1 on both sides, and that will get me to the same answer of x equals negative 8.6. Okay, let's have a look at the third one. What we've got now, minus 5x equals 125. So when we write minus 5x, that means minus 5 times x. We're lazy and don't write the times in there, but it is there. Okay, if we've got a plus or a subtraction or a divide, we'd write that, but times is what we get too lazy to write. So what's the opposite of multiplying by negative 5? The opposite of multiplying is dividing. So let's divide both sides by negative 5. This negative 5 over negative 5 will cancel, and that leaves me just with an x on that side. Now, deal with the numbers. 125 divided by 5 is 25, and I've got one negative sign there, so I've got a negative in front. Okay, and question 4. We now have x over 5 is equal to negative 3.2. So that line there, remember, means divided. So that's saying x divided by 5, x over, x out of 5. So the opposite of dividing by 5 is multiplying by 5. So I want to multiply both sides by 5. So I'm going to multiply this side by 5 and this side by 5. And the 5's there cancel to leave me with an x, and negative 3.2 times 5 is equal to negative 16.